Hello everyone, welcome to the third week of the St. Joseph philosophy course. This week we'll be talking about forms. Through our knowledge of forms, we will come to understand certain modern problems. We will look at artificial intelligence and come to a basic understanding of why there can never be a true artificial intelligence. We will come and have a basic understanding of natural law and why realism is important for this system. We will also come to see the Eucharist, how an understanding of forms allows Catholics to understand forms, and really why Catholics are natural metaphysicians because of their understanding of the Eucharist. And we will also look at modern philosophy and how modern philosophy and its rejection of forms and universals has caused major problems for Catholic thought and belief in God. So today we're going to talk about forms and understand how forms relate to man. Now, what is a form? A form is simply a concept or an idea. So how do we know things? We don't just do math. We're not computers. Man is a composite of body and soul, or matter and form. So like the computer, man is capable of the math, and he's capable of knowing all sorts of different things. However, man is more than just a computer. He is not just body. He is also soul. Because man has soul, man can comprehend. Man can know ideas. Now, a computer might be able to do math much faster and with a greater speed than man can. However, there are two reasons why the computer is limited to the capabilities of man. One is because the things that a computer can do, it can only do this because the computer is coded by a man. A man can do all the math of a computer, it just takes him more time. Also, because a computer is just material, it does not have material components. A computer is only capable of mathematical processes. It is not capable of true comprehension, which is required by an immaterial intellect. Right, so how does man come to know things? What does this immaterial intellect do that a mere computer cannot do? Well, it can grasp forms or ideas. Now, what is a form? A form and idea can be used interchangeably, but form is a little more specific. You can think of a form as a blueprint. Now be careful, a blueprint is an imperfect explanation of a form. A form is far more than just a mere blueprint. There is so much more belonging to it that encompasses reality. However, for a very basic understanding, maybe an analogical understanding of a form, you can think of it as a very complex blueprint. Now, to understand this idea of the form, we will go to Plato, who was really the first to be credited with understanding the concept of the form. Now, Plato has this idea of the form in his story called Plato's Cave. Now, this story starts with there are four men who are prisoners. They're in a cave, and they're chained together, and they can only face a wall. Now, behind these prisoners is a fire, a burning fire, and this fire casts shadows on the wall that the prisoners are facing. Now, the prisoners can't see anything else besides the wall because their head is chained as well, so they can only look straight in front of them. Now, as people carry objects by this fire, the images of these objects are shadowed on the wall that the prisoners are looking at. And as they see different objects, they come to give these objects names and have a certain knowledge of these objects. And these prisoners begin to think that these shadows are indeed the real objects themselves. However, one day, one of these prisoners is released from the prison. He's allowed to go out of the cave and escape. Now he goes out into the sun. At first, the sun blinds him. His eyes are not acclimated to the light. However, with a little bit of time, he is able to see. He looks around, he sees color, 3D objects, beauty. He realizes that those shadows he saw in the cave were only mere shadows. They were not the actual objects that man was experiencing. Now, once this man has this knowledge of these things, he has an obligation then, not just to himself, but to go out and teach the people in the cave, to instruct the ignorant. So this man goes back down into the cave after he has been enlightened and seen the truth. And he goes and tries to release the people from the cave. However, the people from the cave think he's crazy. They scorn him. They think he is ridiculous for saying there's more to reality than just these mere shadows. And they refuse to leave, and they even fight him. This is the story of Plato's cave. Now there are two truths in this story. The first is this idea of reality. A lot of times there is a status quo, an understanding of the world that people are used to. And unfortunately, when people are used to this reality, they don't want to change. They don't want to budge. They want to remain in their ignorance because it's comfortable. In a certain sense, it's easy. It's what people know. And there is a struggle to free people from their ignorance. Now, the second part that we look at in this story is the idea of forms. In the beginning, Plato talks about the people in the cave and looking at the shadows. And they see the shadows as objects. Then when they go out into the real world, they see that things are much more than shadows. There's depth, there's so much more to these objects. This is how Plato understands the world. He sees the things we see as having an internal form, a concept, an idea to them. And these concepts and ideas exist in the perfect world, or in a second realm of existence. Now, in this second realm of existence, all the ideas or forms of the world, beauty, goodness, man, exist perfectly. And they pre-exist there before they exist in the actual material objects. Now, as Catholics, this sounds a bit ridiculous. However, this idea has been baptized by the Catholic Church. How do we as Catholics understand this? Well, we don't believe that these forms exist in another realm, but we do believe they exist in the divine intellect. Before things existed, things in their concepts, in their idea, existed in the mind of God. God had an idea of tree, of a rock, of a stone. For these ideas, these concepts, these are the forms. And then when God created things, these ideas that pre-existed in the divine intellect were then placed into matter. And once this idea is placed into the matter of the rock, or the stone, or the wood, or the gold, they became physical, material objects. Now we have to remember man is created in the likeness and image of God. If you remember in your Baltimore catechisms, this image and likeness of God is primarily in the intellect. Man's intellect is not the same, but it is similar to God's. By this similarity, man is able to know things in a similar way to the method by which God knows things. Now, man's understanding is imperfect. It's, in a sense, incomplete, but it is still similar to the way God understands things. Man understands things through forms. For the form that God put into those material objects, man then abstracts, and those subsist in man's intellect as well. Now, what exactly is a form? We see that it is a method by which we come to know the material world and the immaterial world as well. A form is something that can be applied to any particular case. So let's give an example. Let's say you have man, right? Remember our talk from week 1. We had genus and we had species. So when we look around, we see many individual men, right? However, when we understand the form of man, we do not understand the specific individual man or the particulars of any specific man. We understand what is universal to all men. So the immaterial intellect is capable of knowing things, that concept, that idea of man, that is not particular to any individual, but universal to all. Now, this is also what separates a human being from a dog. Now, a dog or an animal is able to know those particulars, size, shape, and then it's able to associate good and bad with certain size and shapes and characteristics. However, that universal concept cannot be known to a dog, or who someone is cannot be known to a dog. That's why a dog may have always known, always liked. Once that person puts on unusual clothes or dyes their hair or something, that dog or cat may not recognize them as well. The same is true when someone else wears clothes that cat usually associates with. The cat will be more friendly to the person with those clothes. The reason is because the cat or dog can only recognize goodness with the characteristics, good or bad with the characteristics. But it cannot comprehend the universal concept of humanity or dogness or catness. However, man is able to do this. Now, if you look even higher on that chart I had for you earlier for week 1, you can see that there's different levels such as being and animals. Now again, the truths of animals do not apply particularly to any one animal, but they apply to all animals. This is another example of a universal that the human intellect is capable of comprehending. And it is only capable of doing this because the human intellect is immaterial. Now, animalness is not something that exists materially in objects. For objects are animals, and animals have certain characteristics. But the idea of animal, the concept of animal, is not particular, it is universal. And therefore, it is not material. The concept is immaterial. And therefore, it is a form and not of matter. Now, when we look at this form, this idea that was created in the divine mind, since God created it, we see that things were created a certain way and for a particular end or a particular purpose. We see a gold is to be gold, is to have the characteristics of gold, the shininess. is to act and perform as gold acts. Because gold acts the way it's supposed to act, we can sculpt it and use it for electronics and for various machines. Now, this is also true for animals. When we look at animals, we see they're created for a purpose and to function a certain way. An animal functions a certain way, partly because of his body, but he also has a form. And it is through this form that an animal has a life, and then the animal acts the way an animal does. Though yes, we can partly attribute to the brain and material characteristics, but the ultimate cause is the form that exists in divine intellect. We can see that animals as a whole have an end to reproduction and to self-preservation. Next, we can look at man. Man also has these ends for reproduction and self-preservation because he has the perfections of an animal. Man can know in the same manner that an animal knows because he has the physical perfections of an animal, the brain, the senses. However, man also has an intellect. So though man can know in the manner that an animal knows, man is also capable of higher intellectual functions. These higher intellectual functions are immaterial. And it is through these higher functions that man knows ideas. And it is these knowledge of ideas that man can truly love something, that man can truly love God. It's also aided by man's immaterial intellect and his immaterial will. And because man has been given this intellect and this will, there is a purpose for that as well. All right, if we look back at last week, remember Parmenides and Heraclitus. Now they stumbled upon another truth, not just of motion, but of stasis. Now when we look at things such as gold and copper and various things that exist, we see a principle of change and a principle of stasis. Now that thing that remains, that doesn't change, is the form. Forms are true for all time. The idea of water, the idea of gold, those pre-existed in the divine intellect. Therefore, they are eternally true. Now, when God makes something gold or makes something copper, like we said last week, that copper or that gold remains copper or gold because it has a copper or gold idea in that material object. However, the accidental forms, size, shape, color, those all change as the object changes. There's what we call artificial forms as well. Now, a normal form exists in the mind of God. An artificial form exists in the mind of an artist. So let's say someone wants to make a sculpture. Man has an idea of Plato or Jesus or the Pieta. And he takes this image, which is at this point just an accidental form, and he puts this accidental form into marble or gold. And through this idea, man has imposed this idea on the form and made art. So you can see that now this is analogous to God, who is the ultimate creator, uses forms to turn matter into existence. Man uses things that pre-exist, and he can create. Now there's a distinction, with God, it's called first creation. With man, it's only creation by analogy, and it's called second creation. And this is when man takes something that's already exists, like a statue, and he modifies it and places his form, his idea into it. Now, he does not put an essential form or substantial form into the object like gold. Rather, he takes something that pre-exists, such as gold, and manipulates its accidents to make it into a statue. Now, this understanding of form also applies to substantial change, as you can see. Now, as we've just demonstrated with the statue, there is accidental change through forms, such as the shape or color of the statue. Then there's also substantial change, such as when oxygen and hydrogen change into water. Now, when we look at oxygen and hydrogen, we see very different properties. Oxygen and hydrogen are flammable. They have different states of matter at different temperatures and pressures. They're usually a gas. Where water puts out fire, it has different powers. It also has different characteristics, such as usually a liquid at room temperature and pressure. So we can see a change in form, a change from hydrogen and oxygen to a new idea, a new form, which is water. Now, how can we apply this to our everyday lives? Well, there are two methods where we can look and really apply this concept to everyday living. One is artificial intelligence. Nowadays, there is all this talk about artificial intelligence, the scare of artificial intelligence. It's become very popular. And we will see that because of the intellect, the immaterial intellect, artificial intelligence really isn't possible, as we said earlier. A prime example is called Google Similar Images. Now, this is a process by which you upload an image, Google scans that image, and tries to find similar images. However, even with the powerful servers of Google, Google has failed to do what is possible for the young child. If you take a simple apple, a child who understands the concept of an apple can then associate that very easily, without much effort, with other apples. You can draw a makeshift apple, and the child can see that that concept of apple exists in that art. However, you take a physical apple and you put it into Google Similar Images, and it is a complete failure. Somewhat similar to an animal's ability to only know the accidents. It can look at apples, and it will give you some apples in return, but considering all the millions of apple pictures on the internet, it will slowly turn into pictures of things other than an apple. And you can do this with many other objects. Now, this attempt has been such a failure on Google's attempt to make artificial intelligence that aside from just searching for the object apple, Google has also added keyword searches. So it searches the object apple, and it relies on people who have named that object apple in order to perform its searches. The reason is because, again, man understands the immaterial concept of apple. A computer, no matter how fast or how quick it can perform processes, as long as it does not have those immaterial processes of knowing, a computer will not be able to perform these tasks of knowing the apple that are very simple to a child. Another method by which we can come to see our understanding of forms in the real world is natural law. So everything is created for a purpose, as we said. Everything is in the divine mind, and God has a reason, an order, a purpose when He created these things. A reason for that form. So man as a form was created with intelligence. Now this intelligence has a purpose and a reason for its existence. We can clearly see that when God created intelligence, He gave man the capacity to love and to know. And because of this, man has an obligation to love and to know the all-powerful God. This is not just known through revelation. Rather, this can be determined simply through reason. Another area that we can use forms to better comprehend is the Holy Eucharist. So there's been much questioning by the average person who is not learned in philosophy as to whether or not the Eucharist will appear as flesh and blood when you look at the atomic structure. Because there is this idea that atomic structure is the very essence of what determines what a thing is. However, atomic structure is a mere accident. The underlying reality of a thing is its form, its concept. In that bread and wine, there is the form of Jesus Christ. And that's what makes it truly the flesh and blood of Jesus. Even though it's miraculously the accidents of bread and wine appear, it is still the form of Jesus and his flesh that is truly present in that Holy Eucharist. Another area that we can see that the idea of form is important is in relation to modern philosophy. Now, modern philosophy, it's based on doubt, more or less a rejection of the world of forms. Because modern philosophy rejects the existence of forms, when modern philosophers look at things, they don't see God in all of existence. They don't have a natural law, that moral obligation, because God created man in a certain way that is intelligible and knowable. And this is part of the reason why we have so much immorality in modern culture, because of a lot of the philosophical foundations that our modern culture rests on is based on modern philosophy, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. This is the foundation. This inability to see God through the material creation and his purpose and desire has led man into many problems and errors. That ends the talk for today. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. Have a nice day.